Hi everyone, I'm Gabriela Mercuri, Deputy Managing Director at CoC Europe, and I'm beyond thrilled to be here today and host the celebration of the first approval anniversary of the EU Cloud Code of Conduct. So basically, a little over a year ago, the Belgium Data Protection Authority, following the positive opinion by the EDPB, signed the approval of the EU Cloud Code of Conduct, as well as the accreditation of CoC Europe as its dedicated monitoring body. Those two elements together made the code become the first tool of its kind to be fully legally operational under the GDPR and actually reach the market. So since then, the EU Cloud CoC has been significantly contributing to the mitigation of legal uncertainty and to support the materialization of GDPR core values on a daily basis, to foster accountability, transparency, and to establish the necessary trust to underpin Europe's digital transition. Therefore, this is a benchmark. This is really laying the foundation for the continuous development of core regulatory instruments. And there is certainly a long path ahead of us before we reach the optimization of codes of conduct more generally. So this work does not stop here. This is a continuous effort to ensure that these tools can fulfill their role and really build cohesion and harmonization, in our case in the cloud sector and across different sectors of our economy. So today I'm very glad to welcome Professor Kelber, who is a German Commissioner for Data Protection and Freedom of Information, and who will be here today sharing a little bit about his perception when it comes to co-regulation and the data protection environment. So welcome, Mr. Kelber. Thanks again for being with us today. And if you don't mind, I will already jump to the first question.
Yes, please.
And yes, so May was not only the anniversary of the EU Cloud CoC, of its approval, but was also the anniversary of GDPR, one of them, of its implementation. So it has been 4 years now. And certainly that raised a lot of awareness when it comes to privacy-related risks among several stakeholders. Nonetheless, there are still a lot of challenges and asymmetries when it comes to GDPR implementation across different sectors, across different players, and notably across member states as well. So in that regard, I wanted to hear from you, what are those main challenges that you have witnessed in your capacity, both at the European and at the national level?
Due to its nature, European law like the GDPR does not regulate every detail, but gives, at least in some parts, more an legal abstract concept. So, and companies, on the other hand, need as precise rules as possible. And on the other hand, have to look at every data possession individually. And so it's, from my point of view, it's necessary that the data protection authorities in all EU member countries, in all EU member states, agree to deal with certain issues the same way, so harmonizing the enforcement of that European law. And so in the last 4 years, the European Data Protection Board, where these authorities are assembled to do that, this board is working constantly to harmonize its views and, for example, release guidelines for the companies.
Yeah, certainly, and this brings me to the next topic on exactly codes of conduct being an enabler to support this exchanges among authorities. In the end of the day, if you're talking about a transnational code of conduct, which is the case of the EU Cloud CoC, that means that you need the green light from the EDPB, means that all these authorities that have different traditions, legal backgrounds and so forth, they need to agree on something that's actually quite outstanding if you think about the European regulatory environment as a whole. And codes of conduct can be one of the drivers. They are obviously, this is something that we are very keen on highlighting, because this is not to substitute the regulator, but just it's an additional safeguard. Obviously, we are not enforcing GDPR by ourselves. We are also regulated, and but the monitoring body, which is a key element when it comes to codes of conduct. So Article 41, the GDPR brought. Compared to the directive, we didn't have the monitoring body, and now we do, and this is one of the main added values. And so, yes, when it comes to the interactions between the different authorities, I think codes of conduct are an important enabler. And in that sense, I wanted to get a little bit of your opinion, as I already mentioned, when it comes to the monitoring body. So this ongoing due diligence that, as I also just mentioned, was not there under the directive. It came with GDPR. It's something that is still being established in the market, and we are figuring out and optimizing as we go. But I wanted to hear what is the added value of this monitoring element.
So it's a question of the installed process of how CoCs are constructed. I think that was a clever process in the GDPR. At the first hand, that there is a national authority working with stakeholders on such a code of conduct, but to have green light or a pro vote from the board, so to have that CoC being held on the European level. And so it's binding for everyone under the CoC, but on the other side, it's binding for the point of view of all the 27 European member authorities for their way of enforcing the GDPR. So it's a kind of a safeguard for both sides. It's easing the way of how to work with the companies under such a CoC, and it gives some clarity and answers in details for companies which are following the CoC. That's the first part of it. The idea that the public data protection authorities has to certify the way of how the CoC is constructed and how the monitoring bodies are installed gives a kind of a legal base. And of the base of trust for everyone in the concept. But to do the everyday work of really easing it for the public authorities, this idea of an impartial but non-public agency monitoring and really not giving just a kind of paper and some written proposals and some written commitments, but really testing if that what is under the CoC is installed in the market and enforcing the commitments of the CoC. So that's a nice construction of regulation, not self-regulation, combined with the enforcement of public authorities.
Yeah, exactly. I think, yeah, and in my experience, that's where I see really the added value is obviously that is not the same experience. Every code of conduct has different paths, but the experience that we had so far with the EU Cloud CoC was building a mutual understanding with the authorities. So obviously the authorities are there regulating several sectors of our economy. It's simply not possible to be experts in each and every sector. And so that was very important in our case for the Belgian Data Protection Authority, for the co-reviewers also, and all the others that contributed to the code and actually really improved the final version of the code after going through the EDPB. This was extremely important for them to understand our challenges and the other way around us as well. And in that sense, we kicked off this exercise under the GDPR with the cloud sector, which is a foundation technology, is really enabling innovation and growth, and let's say it's one of the main drivers of the digital transition. So how do you see, what are the advantages of having a code of conduct in such a sector, and beyond the legal benefits that obviously brings to cloud service providers, because this is a processing code, so it's covering Article 28 GDPR and all its related articles. How do you perceive the impact of this instrument among controllers and ultimately among data subjects?
So innovative, safe and lawful cloud computing is of interest for everyone, in the public and the non-public sector also, which is really looking out for improving and having a kind of a digital transformation of their work too. And a product or a service could be seen as more valuable if it works within the code of conduct. So if there is a reliability for companies or authorities using services which are under the code of conduct, to have a clarity that if they use that services in a law-compliant way, the whole service itself is law-compliant and lawful at that point. So it's easier for them of really bringing in new business cases, new ideas, new products to the market if the modules they use are tested, are certified, are secured by construct like CoCs. So that's one of the ideas to really speed up innovation. And I think code of conducts give room to adapting to new technologies brought in the market, to changes to business cases, in a way that all of the companies following the code of conduct with their services and products can really adapt to these changes too.
You touched on an important element, and I think codes of conduct, they also have this feature of being flexible tools, right? So there is a lot, obviously you have strict requirements, but you can design them accordingly, and it's exactly the goal is to specify the requirements against in a specific context, so you must tailor to specific goals. And in that sense, the EU Cloud CoC itself, we built a modular approach. So we have the baseline code, which covers Article 28, and the goal was to potentially, as new challenges, new regulatory developments come into place, we could build on top modules to address specific issues. For example, now we are working on a module for the UK approval of the code, which when we first drafted the code, this was not in the horizon, let's say. As I mentioned, the efforts started actually under the directive in 2012, so it was a decade-long, basically, effort. And one of the other module that we are currently working on is the third country data transfer module, and I'm sure you have answered a lot of questions in that regard. I mean, it's been a while since international data transfers have been a major topic in the data protection landscape. So knowing that codes of conduct are one of the tools that GDPR puts forward that could support compliant and robust international data transfer, do you believe that these tools can be a supportive system to optimize GDPR-compliant data transfers? And regarding considering the latest developments on a potential EU-US agreement for a next privacy shield, do you think there's still added value to have codes of conduct in place?
Absolutely, yes. So the decision of the European Court of Justice was not a surprise at all for experts, but was a kind of a wake-up call. And it was a very clear decision. There was no grace period for unlawful data transfer to third countries. And it shown that some parts of how the way of transferring data was developing the last years was unlawful in the situation, as long as, for example, US-based but Chinese-based or Russian-based companies doesn't follow the decision which were taken by the GDPR for data transfer, personalized data processed of European citizens. The European Court of Justice decided that every data possession has to be seen individually. So that's one part even code of conduct can't help. But on the other side, they decided that additional safeguards, additional supplementary measures has to be taken to make such a data transfer legally. And code of conduct can help at that point for what are the necessary supplementary measures to make such a data transfer legally under the ECG decision, the Schrems II decision, and the GDPR. So, but it doesn't really mean an end to the process. So even if you comply to the CoC, you have to check individually on your data possession if there's really a lawful base for that when the ECG decision is taken into regard. What's the second thing is about how to find a long-term based, secure and lawful base for such data transfers to countries which are adequate level of data protection. We have such adequacy decisions with some countries like Japan, Korea, United Kingdom, Israel, for example, but there is no one with the US and with other large developing democratic governed countries in the world too. So the idea to find a common base of understanding, especially what government access to personalized data transfer to a country means, and to be proportionate, to have the ability to go to court for citizens, to have an independent authority looking at the security forces if they really obey to the idea of proportionality of government access, to find that for as large region of the world of democratic governed countries as possible, to have this idea of free flow of data with trust among the European Union, North America, not only Japan and Korea, but countries like India, Brazil, Mexico, South Africa. This is a step to be done in the next 1 or 2 years, hopefully starting with the US and with the support of the data protection authorities, because we don't want to have formal hurdles for data transfer. We want to have a high level of privacy and data protection. And if that process enables us to have a common ground in as many countries as possible, that would be a success for privacy and so for the civil rights of citizens in Europe and other regions in the world.
Exactly, and I think GDPR already, I mean, it is a blueprint. It has been expiring several other regulatory developments across the globe. Of course, we are a long way from convergence, and nonetheless, I think there is a movement, internationally speaking, and actually recently we have been discussing with a lot of Brazilian organizations that they came to us. It's a very interesting fact because Brazil's LGPD came into force, the data protection regulation, which is quite close to GDPR. Still, there are differences, and one of the differences is actually Article 41 GDPR, the monitoring element. So codes of conduct are there. Nonetheless, there is no monitoring body. Nonetheless, Scope Europe has been approached by different Brazilian organizations that are still interested in implementing monitoring bodies because they see the added value, as we have discussed, of having this third party, this additional safeguard. And which is, for us, it was very curious to have the industry but mobilizing itself towards a stricter assessment, let's say. So we are currently discussing these possibilities, and it brings me to my last question, which is, I know codes of conduct as we also discussed, are establishing against different scenarios. Nonetheless, what are the elements that you believe are crucial to make sure that it's a successful tool that has enough market adoption? And at the end of the day, if you don't have enough market adoption and you don't achieve the harmonization that you are looking for, and how do you see that?
That's an interesting question. Well, the idea is behind the BCRs and CoCs and certification is not to hold that as a European instrument, but really to bring that into a global debate about what are the instruments of enforcing privacy and data protection regulation. This year I have the chair of the G7 Roundtable of Data Protection Authorities following the G7 presidency of Germany. We have free flow of data with trust as one of our main topics, and we will add the idea of how CoCs, BCRs, certification could be installed in different regions worldwide with our colleagues. And what are the steps? The first is a well-made framework of future-proof laws with as detailed regulation as possible without losing the future-proof on that part. There is room for self-regulation, so these like ideas of CoC with an effective and impartial supervision. So that's a part of it. Without that, self-regulation is not binding enough to really have an impact on the market. The public authorities should approve the framework for the self-regulation and accredit the non-public supervision agency. And at least there should be rules for regular reporting and how to deal with complaints. So without dealing with complaints, it was like the old ideas of giving some paper out and if nothing happened, nothing happens. And if that could be established with CoCs, with European-wide CoCs, this would be a role model even for North America, Latin America, and Asia.
Exactly. That's this flexibility of how to build CoCs can lead to very different tools. In the end of the day, I think it's very important, and that's what we were striving for with the EU Cloud CoC, was to really put forward an robust, ongoing due diligence for the monitoring body to really make it about co-regulation and not companies simply exactly signing up a paper. So the code does have, for instance, which is not a requirement, an initial assessment. So every company, you don't just declare that you are compliant with the code, but you always go through an initial assessment. There is in-depth assessment that is a whistleblowing mechanism for the complaints structure of the code. Therefore, yeah, it's really great to hear these remarks and to see, yeah, the convergencies and that at least, as I said, it's a path. I think we are on the right track, but still those exchanges are crucial to continuously improving. So thank you very much for being here today, for your feedback. It's extremely helpful to continue this track and moving forward and trying to improve GDPR implementation on a daily basis.
You're welcome and happy birthday.
Thank you.